Thank you very much, liners. Welcome back to your channel, Transmission Lines Engineering TV. Thank you very much for your company. In this video, we will see in more detailed way the topics of surveying for a crossing design. On previous occasions, we have talked about the different crossings in a transmission line, and each of them has its own needs, but also has its own particularities. We will start with the general data required, that is, with the identification of those points which are, let's say, common to any type of crossing. We have, as number one, the identification of the nature of the crossing. It is a railway, it is a highway, it is a river, what it is. We have as well as number two, identify the owner of the infrastructure to cross and later contact them and request the corresponding crossing permit. We need as well the identification number of the infrastructure, that is, highway number or road number, number of the railway or pipeline, or in the case of a river, its name. We need as well as number four, the crossing angle. It refers to the angle generated between the central axis of our line with respect to the crossing to be analyzed. It should be mentioned that as a recommendation during the definition of the trajectory of the line, the crossing angle is set as close as possible to 90 degrees, or at least not to be very reduced, since it will be difficult to locate the structures within this area. But this is not a rule, it's just a recommendation. We need as well the destinations of the crossing to both sides to the nearest populations in the case of roads or railways, or pumping stations in case of pipelines. We need as well the identification of the limits of the right-of-way of those crossings within their intersection with the central axis of the transmission lines. Not only in the central axis, but also its projection to the full width of the right-of-way of our line. We're going to need as well the sizing of the crossing between both sides of the right-of-way. In other words, for example, a road. We need the distances from one end of the right-of-way to the vehicular asphalt, the width of the asphalt, and the distance to the other side of the right-of-way. It's going to be required as well the mileage data of the infrastructure to cross over, or at least identify the distances to the nearest measurement signs. Now we will see its particularities depending on the type of the crossing. We have first crossings with railways. This type of crossings require the identification of the following data. We need the number of the railway and closest stations in both directions. This information is very necessary because the owner of the railway needs to know about the way and the location of the crossing for the purpose of granting the permit. The transfer sizes of the railway is required across the width of its right-of-way, including a very specific detail which every railway owner will request: the elevation of the rail tracks. And the reason for this is because the train transit is not at the same elevation as the rest of the terrain. The railway tracks are built on a compacted surface which is above of the level of the natural terrain, and this small detail can become the difference between giving a permit or not, or what could be worse, to put at risk the vertical clearances from the train cars towards the energized cables. And finally, on the crossing section, the axis of the transmission line must be located so that the line designer can evaluate the vertical clearance along the length and width of the right-of-way of both infrastructures simultaneously. Now we have roads crossings. For roads, it is necessary to identify the type of the road. It is a municipal, it is a state, it is an interstate highway or freeway, what type of road it is. Similarly, it is required to know the destinations to the nearest populations on both directions, in addition to the crossing angle between the road and the transmission line. Cross-sectional geometry of the road, that is, the detailed dimensions from its right-of-way limits to the ends of the vehicular asphalt passing through the center. This type of details is necessary because the Highway Administration Agency will need this information to perform its evaluation to issue the crossing permit. Now we will talk about pipelines crossings. For pipelines, it is necessary to define if it is a superficial or underground pipeline. Since pipelines are connected to pumping stations, it is necessary to identify the owner of the pipeline, to contact them and investigate the nearest pumping stations. Usually, this data cannot always be found on site, such as on a road or on a railway. It is best to contact the line owner, the transmission line owner, so they in turn reach the pipeline owner and have this information. But unfortunately, this information of the pipeline is not really easy to obtain, so get prepared for that. Again, the crossing angle, and if found on site, the identification of the limits of the right-of-way. The characteristics of the duct, such as the pipe thickness, transported product, etc., are data really difficult to and almost impossible to find. Now we will go ahead with river crossings. Not all rivers require a crossing permit, but all rivers obey to a certain typification established by the agencies which administer the hydrological resources on each country. Once this is done, the first step is to identify the administrative agency, since this is the one who will dictate those rivers which require a special permit. Either way, permission or not permission, I'll start mentioning the points to be measured in a general way for any river, and then those particular data for the ones which require permission. We need to identify the river banks. Make a visual inspection of the undermining details at both ends because here we can have an idea of how high the water level can rise, and this data is important for the designer of the transmission lines because it will set the origin point for the evaluation of the vertical clearances to the conductors. In addition, the crossing angle, as well as always, it is required. In the case of great flow rivers or those of considerable width where there is vessels traffic, it is a completely different process, since in addition to identifying the environmental requirements and river banks, it is necessary to contact the administrative agency to consult a very important data for this type of crossings called water's maximum expected level, which will provide the information until what elevation has been registered, the maximum level of water, and with this data taken into consideration for the vertical clearances for the crossing. The administrating agency will also dictate the signaling requirements for the crossing, that is, structures painting and or marker balls on the lower cables to be visible by the vessels, or on the upper cable to be visible by air traffic. Now we will talk about the surroundings with airports. The topic of airports is not exactly a crossing. Airports are very sensitive zones. It refers to the data that the line designer requires to perform the signaling of the transmission line to be seen by the air traffic and, of course, avoid accidents. In this case, firstly, it is necessary to identify those main or secondary airports to contact the administrating agency, and the airport agency will provide us a very necessary data called the approximation cone, which will represent the route followed by every aircraft in their final approach towards the runway, either before landing or takeoff. No structure of any size and no cable should be located within this approximation code, and this is mandatory in any country and any type of airport, never mind how small it is. In addition, the airport agency will decide the type of signaling to install. The signaling devices, such as painting the structures in orange and white colors, and the installation of air signaling marker bolts, can also dictate the maximum height of the structures within this area. In further videos, we will see the topic of development of the crossing drawings. As you can see, a transmission line project has small, we could call them mini projects, which require, in addition of engineering design, a very timely and logistic coordination study with third-party agencies, which will work together so that all of us can have power in our houses. I hope this information is useful for you guys liners. My courses of transmission line trainings will be available in my website. Thank you very much for your visit. Don't forget to subscribe and leave your comments on this one. Transmission Lines Engineering TV, training to power the world.